And I just felt this overwhelming conviction come upon me. I felt the anger recede, and I instantly was brought to tears. And I knew that the prayers for the people I'd been doing Christianity Explored with and various other people were being answered, and I actually felt that day that I was drawn in by God.
This is Convicted, a podcast sharing stories of hope from inside. Join David Binder every fortnight as he interviews ex-offenders, chaplains and volunteers about the amazing things God is doing in UK prisons right now.
My guest today on the Convicted podcast is Liam Rutter. Let's just start then. Just tell us, Liam, a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and so on.
Good morning, David. It's great to be doing this. So, start with myself. My name is Liam Rutter. I'm 40 years old. I'm married to Becky. Got 3 children, 24, 18 and 12. Got a busy family. I'm originally from Ipswich, born and bred. And yeah, so that's a little bit about myself and my family. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to doing this podcast today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liam. That sounds busy. Tell us a little bit then about how you became a Christian, Liam.
Okay, yeah, this is always a challenge to get it in a nutshell, because obviously testimonies can be quite vast, but I'll do my best to get the main points in. So the best way I can describe it is I wasn't brought up in a Christian household. I had no concept of God from a young age. My only memory about God, obviously I am from 2 cultures, so my dad is British and my mum's side is Caribbean. I remember being at my Caribbean grandmother's house one day. There's a King James Bible there. I asked her what it was, and she really just said that it's only something she gets out when she's in trouble or in need. So I didn't really think that it was a kind of relevant thing for everyday living. And that's my kind of only childhood memory of the Bible and, I suppose, faith, Christianity. I was quite a shy kid growing up to about the age of 12. There was some stuff going on in my life. My parents separated. And from 12, I started to get in trouble. And this basically continued all through my teenage years into most of my 20s. So key points of how I became a Christian. So when I was 20, I met my now wife, Becky, who I'm married to. And we fell in love quite quickly. We started to build a family quite quickly. And we had our son not long after, because obviously my daughter, she had before we got together. So I brought up as my own. So life was going really well, coming from being quite a young teen, getting in trouble, going through teenage years, and here I am in my 20s actually having responsibility for her and her daughter and now son on the way. But through various events, my old lifestyle started to crop up in those times, and we had some tough times to deal with. But one of the key things she said is when we're going through those tough times is she said that she was a Christian, and I could see that there was a difference from her in other relationships I'd been involved in. So I was kind of sort of interested, but not kind of that interested at the same time, to be honest with you. But the crux of our relationship was continuing to be challenging. So in 2009, my wife, unfortunately, was hit by a drunk driver. She lost her sister and her best friend in the accident, and she survived with numerous injuries. It was a very challenging time for all of us and the family, but specifically for me, dealing with quite an angry person. I was dealing with revenge. I was dealing with kind of how to process what was going on. And during that time, I was probably at the lowest point of my life. She was in hospital altogether for 8 weeks. But I remember as she was coming out of hospital, her older sister, who was a Christian, said, Liam, you need God. You're like a ticking time bomb. So that was kind of my first exposure to God. At that time, I didn't really want to consider a God because my life was falling apart. But I reluctantly agreed to go on a Christianity Explored course in 2011. So it was still a year and a half after the accident. I wasn't really taking any notice for the first few weeks, but when they started to talk about Jesus dying for sinners, I was starting to wake up and really listen. So this was a whole long process through from 2011 to 2012. But in March 2012, after having a week off at work, I got really angry in the workplace. I lost my temper with one of the drivers, and I was told to leave the depot. But in this time, I remember getting in my van, getting all my equipment for the day because I'm a delivery driver, And I just felt this overwhelming conviction come upon me. I felt the anger recede, and I instantly was brought to tears. And I knew that the prayers for the people I'd been doing Christian Explored with and various other people were being answered. And I actually felt that day that I was drawn in by God. And I repented then and then. And I remember having a peace about me driving to my route, which was about an hour from where I was leaving the depot. So March 2012 was when I became a Christian, and things started to happen very quickly. I started to walk away from my old life, my old friends. I was giving up old lifestyles. I started getting into the Word of God. And, from beyond that led to some of the things that I'm going to be talking about more in this podcast regarding prison and other things. So I hope that's give you enough in a bit of a nutshell without not going on too long.
Thank you. What a journey. And yeah, it sounds like you've been through some real highs and lows. Let's just zoom in, if we can, on the incident with your wife and the drunk driver. Yep. Just talk to us a bit more about that, if you can.
Yeah, not a problem. Basically, on the evening, it was the 20th of February 2009. My wife, Becky, her sister, Emma, and their best friend, Kate, went out for the evening at a local social club. I was at our flat looking after my two children at the time. My daughter was 8, my son was 2. She said she'd be back around midnight, 1 a.m. in the morning, and off she went. But by the time 12 o'clock came, I hadn't heard from her, so I thought I'd just check in, send her a message to see, because obviously these events can go on longer. By this point, I hadn't heard anything, even up to around 1:30, still hadn't heard anything. By that point, I was contacting her sister and her best friend. I wasn't getting any response from any of them. And then it was probably around 2:30 in the morning, there was a knock at my flat door, which I was overjoyed, because even though I hadn't heard any responses from them, I knew that they were back, and that was the main thing. But as I went through my flat, which was upstairs, downstairs, unfortunately, there was a policeman and woman at the door. And they explained to me what had happened. So what had happened is around midnight, as my wife, her sister and best friend were coming out of the social club, in the town centre, about a mile or so away, was a young lad. He was 20 years old. He was at a house party. He was drinking a lot of alcohol and taking a lot of drugs. Through various reasons at the party, he managed to impress a young lady. And by doing this, he saw a set of car keys on the side, which he took under the influence. This person in particular had been known for driving without a license through most of his teenage years. So he took the car keys off the side, up the road he went, and unfortunately he was speeding. So as they came out of the social club, he was speeding up the road, he lost control, and you can guess what happened next. He impacted all three of them. My sister-in-law and their best friend died instantly from the accident. My wife survived, possibly because at the time she was taking photos of them two, so she would have been a bit further back than the other two, which means that she didn't get the full impact what they did. And thankfully, there was a kind of off-duty police officer who managed to be in the area, and he assisted to her and got her to the hospital and saved her life at that point. So that's the main things of what happened on that incident. Yeah. So regarding her injuries, so altogether, as I said before in this podcast, she was in hospital for 8 weeks, 2 weeks in critical care, 6 weeks on the ward. And her injuries were quite numerous. She had a head injury, dislocated shoulder, her legs were broken. She's still got metalwork in her knees and her ankles to this day. And obviously there was a blood clot in her stomach, and obviously the trauma of losing her sister and best friend. That was hard for her. We had to adapt quite quickly because we were in a flat. She was not able to get up the stairs, so we had to move out. Temporarily, we moved into my father-in-law's place for 2 or 3 months. And then finally, we got our own council home where we could actually be a family. That was kind of the injury she sustained. And obviously now, as she gets older, if you were to see her physically, she carries a stick, but it doesn't really do justice of what she actually goes through on a daily basis. She's quite a determined, strong lady. So she doesn't want to define by people saying that, she's supposed to be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. She actually does things. She's very determined, which I praise God and I'm thankful for. But obviously, as she gets older, there are worries about her injuries and how it sets in the body and stuff like that. So, praise and glory to God, really. He has sustained us and he sustained her and able to do things that she was told that she probably wouldn't be able to do.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that. Talk us through the journey, I suppose, as to how you felt towards drunk driver and how you feel towards him now.
Like I said before, I became born again Christian in 2012. But obviously in the Christian life, not everything happens quickly. So, if I'm honest with you, I did manage to forgive the driver for what he did, but I didn't forgive him until around 2014, 2015. So you can see there that there's a 2 to 3 year gap of unforgiveness. And that was a real wrestle for me because I knew what the Bible said about forgiving those who harm you. But actually putting that into practice sometimes is not easy.
Do you know, in terms of the drunk driver himself, what happened to him?
So I don't know a huge amount about him, but I know kind of some events that happened. So obviously, one of the things I talk about is the kind of court case. Obviously, the crime he did, the judge told us at the time that he was guaranteed to get a maximum sentence, which was within 14 years. Unfortunately, he didn't get that sentence. He got 8.5 years. But because at the time there was a claim that he was possibly insane during the accident, for his 8.5 years, he done 3 years in a mental institute and eventually done 6 months in prison. So at the time, I thought maybe the system had been played regarding him, but to be in a mental institute for over 3 years seems that there's a lot going on there. And there were various things we heard, even though I don't know 100% true, that there were suicide attempts made by him while he was there. On the actual night, he actually broke his collarbone in the car because when the car crashed, he deserted the car. He was trapped in the car because his collarbone was broken, and the young lady done a runner, whether she was fearful or whether she was just shocked by what happened. I don't know much about her. So he did sustain injury on that evening. And obviously being in the mental institute for 3 years shows there's something going on there. At the time, I didn't think that the sentence was justice. But now I've got to that place of forgiveness. I understand that, I don't know what he was truly going through. And if I had the opportunity, I would know what I would say to him. But only because I got to that place of forgiveness. So before that, I was wrestling, like, I can't do this. He's harmed my family. But once I got that forgiveness, I can honestly say in 10 years or so now, I haven't had any angry thoughts about him regarding the accident.
That's amazing. If you were to see him, what would you say to him?
If I were to see him, if God grants that, if he does, he does. If he doesn't, he doesn't. And the main thing for me going forward is that I make sure that I'm there for my family and their support from me is a priority. But if I were to see him, I would give him the gospel. I would tell him that he's got a second chance. Unfortunately, 2 ladies didn't get a second chance. They died, but you have. And I'd give him the gospel and I'd tell him that I forgive him. I told him that, he can be free from his sins like I was, and he can be a new creature in Jesus Christ. Whether he receives that or not is irrelevant. But I feel like that is the more powerful thing to do. And that's the power of forgiveness, because without that, I don't even know what I wouldn't even want to see him, to be honest with you.
Thanks for sharing that. No, that's very powerful. Okay, let's move on. So you've talked about, what very, very sadly happened in the car accident, but now I understand that you go into prisons and you do ministry there. Yeah, talk to us about that, Liam. How did that come about?
First of all, when I became a Christian, obviously I had a desire for the lost. I've worked with street people. I still do work with street people, homeless, addicts, people coming out of jail. But one of the things I was really drawn to was prisoners, and I thought of my uncle. So my uncle, who died in the 90s, he was in and out of prison most of his life. And I always wondered to myself, did he ever hear the gospel? Did anybody reach out to him? It wasn't really part of much of his life because he was not living in our area and he was in and out of jail. But as a delivery driver, I used to deliver to the local prison. So one day I went to the local prison to deliver and I just saw all these guys in the kind of courtyard. And I just started talking to them and telling them about Christ, and some kind of received it, some heckled and stuff like that. But I came away from those conversations just like, this is something I want to do. So it was 2013. It was probably under a year after my conversion that I applied to get into the prison. So obviously that all went through. And I started off doing church services in prison with a local group, probably about 4 or 5 of us. We used to go in every 8 weeks, do church services, fellowship with the guys. And I did that for many years. Also, something else I do in prison, I don't know if you're aware of this, there's something called a sycamore tree course.
Yeah.
We do with restorative justice.
Yeah.
So that lady from my church knew someone who was involved in that, and she was looking for people who had a story for being victims of crime. And I met up with the prison fellowship guys, and I was only supposed to go in once in 2018 to share my story. Actually, they wanted my wife to share because obviously it happened to her, but she's not really comfortable with public speaking. And because I was in prison anyway, she said, that's right up your street. You'll be relatable more to the guys. You already know what they're like. You're already in there. So I went in there 2018, only supposed to go in once, and I'm still doing it to this day. I'm doing it now in 4 prisons, which are my local prisons. And that's just kind of a snippet about some of the various things I am doing in the prisons.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. You go into 4 prisons, and that's mainly to do sycamore tree stuff.
The church services I mentioned when I first started doing in 2013, they're still ongoing. Though now I'm going in with a different group. So hopefully that'll be monthly, which is something I've been wanting to do, which is good. That's to be starting in June. So I do that. Hopefully I'll be doing that monthly. And that will be at 2 prisons, which are more local to me. And then the other 2 prisons are about an hour away. And that's where I do Sycamore Tree there, because currently I'm wanting to do services there, but that hasn't happened as yet. So I'm doing the services at my local prison, which is 25 minutes away. I also do Sycamore Tree at those prisons as well. But the other prison an hour away, the 2 prisons I do, only Sycamore Tree, probably every 2 or 3 months at the moment.
Very helpful. It gives us a great picture. Now, what are some of the encouragements and challenges, Liam, that you've experienced?
As you know, with prison ministry, there's always encouragements, there's always challenges. So let's start with the encouragements. I think one of the things that encouraged me the most about prison ministry is the guys who are Christians really seem to have zeal. They're in that prison. They're not regularly going out and about in the public, going home. They're actually in that place for the majority of the time. And I really get encouraged every time I go there. I feel like I could just go there and fellowship in there every week, if I'm honest, because of the zeal and the kind of passion that they show towards their faith in Jesus Christ. Obviously, we've seen guys baptized there. We've seen guys come to faith there. We've been part of their journeys. There's quite a few guys. One particular guy I met there probably about 9 or 10 years ago. I befriended him as he was due to release. We were fellowshipping and doing Bible study. He's now doing really good things with a ministry. He goes and pick up guys outside the gate. He journeys with them. So he's actually given back. He's now a believer, and he's kind of in the prison ministry work, doing those things. So yeah, he's a real encouragement. Some of the challenges, with prison ministry, all kinds of things can happen. But I think the more the challenges have come in Sycamore Tree course, because my story is quite raw, I'm not afraid to talk about all aspects of it. We've got to remember in Sycamore Tree, the majority of the guys that I deal with are non-believers. There are some believers, but most of them are non-believers. So when you start talking about forgiveness and talking about forgiving people who have harmed you, that can cause a lot of reactions. I've had people in my face in the past because obviously they haven't dealt with their emotions. They've probably gone through similar crimes. People have to be removed because they weren't dealing with it emotionally. So I'd say that's where the real challenges have come from, the Sycamore Tree course, because the story is quite full on. And I suppose in a way some of the guys feel like I'm weak because in their eyes, I'm not responding with revenge, where a lot of them, I think, would say they're going to respond with revenge. So there's just a few encouragements and challenges I find while doing those ministries.
Somebody listening to this, Liam, I don't know, might be a victim of crime themselves, or might not be, but is just really inspired by your story and thinks, I'd love to get involved in similar to what you're doing, going into prisons, church services, Bible studies, so on. What advice might you have for them? Or, yeah, how would you encourage them?
If God uses this story to reach somebody, I mean, that's the main goal. It's not really necessarily about me. I'm quite happy to just sit back and let God do what he needs to do. But for somebody who hears this, specifically wants to get involved with prison ministry, contact your local churches, find out your prisons in your local area. There is a much need in there. I still think society has a kind of stigma around prisoners, but I don't think you can fully confirm that unless you've actually seen them for yourselves. There are guys in there who do want support, and I think that they will value people going in there to spend time with them. Every single time I go there, guys say, I'm really thankful that you come in. Sometimes it's guys who don't even say a lot. Just actually seeing somebody come from the outside in encourages them, regardless if they're Christians or not. So for somebody who hears this and wants to get involved, just get in touch with your churches, find out where your local prisons are, and just get involved with the chaplaincy and make yourself available. For those who are victim of crime and feel like maybe you wanted to share your stories with guys kind of on a bit of a level like Sycamore Tree, again, reach out to the prisons, reach out to the chaplaincies, and I'm sure that they would be happy to hear your story, because obviously my story would touch some people. Other people's stories, I'm not saying so much you have to go through kind of as much as what I've been through. It could be something very similar, very different to what I've been through, but it still could be the same impact on certain prisoners. So that's the beauty of God working differently for everybody. He knows who needs to hear what in those prisons. So it's just a great thing to do. I mean, I constantly tell people, like, prison is my second home, and I love saying that because I really do feel like it is home. You kind of get the image of, the bars and stuff outside, but really that's not really what it's all about. You actually start to see guys, especially those who want help and to be supported and change their lives. You could be someone that influences them in order to make that change. So, just do everything you can by all means to get involved with the prisons through church, through various ads you see around where you live, and get involved and be part of this great ministry.
That's really encouraging, Liam. Thanks. We're coming towards the end now of the interview and the podcast. What's been encouraging you recently in your own quiet times, or maybe a sermon you've listened to recently? Yeah, what's been really helping you?
I think, when you're involved in kind of ministries like this, it can be very challenging. So I think it's very important that you have that time. I'm very encouraged I've got good brethren around me who I fellowship with regularly. My family is supportive of what I do. So I'm really encouraged by kind of stepping back, in needing to step back from kind of something which is quite full on, fellowship with brothers. Like you're saying, sermons, I constantly listen to sermons online to try and build me up. And I'm always willing to learn. I think with this kind of thing, I've been doing prison ministry now for 12 years and I'm still learning different things. So I think having fellowship regularly is a key thing. Having that time away is a key thing as well, because sometimes things can get overwhelming. And obviously church life and stuff like that is important to making sure that you are being fed yourself. And obviously, me being a husband and a father as well, balance is a very key thing that I'm still learning to do, to be honest with you. Have a good balance, that we're not doing too much ministry, not doing too much of that. So I'm encouraged that, that seems to be happening in my personal life at the moment, even though it is very challenging. But I'm really encouraged fellowship is a key thing for me, being among the brethren, and obviously being the head in the house with being a husband and a father are important, honestly, most important things under God. So there's just a few things that's encouraging me at the moment. And I also work full-time as well for Royal Mail, and I do ministry for Christian charity 10 hours a week while I'm doing outreach. And again, I'm working with prisoners and addicts and guys who are homeless and stuff like that. So there's a lot to be encouraged about, but it's very important that you have those times away that you can reflect and kind of not get overwhelmed. It's the kind of best way to put it.
Brilliant. Do you have like a favourite Bible verse or favourite Bible truth that comes to mind, or maybe something you always go back to when you're doing your outreach, like you just said? Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so obviously the Bible is a very key thing to me, and I believe that the word transform you, and I've seen God do that in my life over the last 12 or 13 years. All praise to him. A couple of verses that come to mind. One of them is in the book of Acts, chapter 20, 24, where the Apostle Paul was talking about his only goal is to finish the race that God has prepared for him, to testify the good news of Jesus Christ. So that's not only a verse that I helped spur me on in the prisons, but just in everyday life, that we know we're going to have many challenges, but, always be seeking to God to testify of his good news in all situations. And probably my favourite Bible verse is from 2 Timothy 2:3, which talks about endure hardness like a good soldier of Jesus Christ. I know that Christian life is not easy, and I'm fully prepared of what the Word of God says about that. So they're the kind of things that kind of drive me on in my Christian life, not only in prison, not only in outreach, but in family life as well, to make sure that we are learning. We're going to make mistakes, but as long as we keep in his word and keep in his ways, then that always encourages me to move forward in everything that he's allowed me to be involved in.
Yeah, fantastic. That's really encouraging. Thank you. And we'll end now, Liam. How can we be praying for you and your family?
Appreciate that, David. So prayers for my family. They're all growing up, and obviously that's another chapter in your life that you have to deal with as a father. So just keep praying that I would lead them well, lead my wife well, that I would be a good leader in the home. And obviously, because God is using me for various ministries, that I make sure I've got that balance. Balance is really key for me, and that I get that balance right and healthy. And I think regarding prayers for ministry, if I'm honest, I want to get in the prisons more. That's always been my vision. That's always been my calling. And I know sometimes these things you have to wait patiently for, and I'm fully understanding of that. But people who know me well know that, the prison, that's where I want to be. So just pray that, if God is lining up opportunities for me to be more active in prisons, more on a kind of, not a daily basis, but more than I'm doing now, then pray that be his will, because that's where I think best, that I'm used for his glory when I'm in there. And like I said before, it's like a second home to me. So just pray that the other ministries I'm involved in, if there's stuff I need to step down from in order to wait for other stuff to come in, that I would do those things well. So there's just a couple of things that you can be praying for, and I really appreciate that, David.
No worries at all. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. And we'll be praying for you, Liam.
You've been listening to Convicted. To find out more about the work of Daylight Christian Prison Trust, go to daylightcpt.org. To make contact with us, send an email to office@daylightcpt.org. This podcast is produced by Good News Broadcasting. To find out more, go to gnba.net.